So, Rockstar just cut off Linux users from the multiplayer mode of GTA 5. But this is just the latest slab in the long list of slabs that game developers have just given us Linux users over the past few years. And behind the click-worthy title of this video, there's an absolute truth. As much as Linux gaming is now a thing you can actually do instead of being a completely deluded attempt, the safety of the current methods we use to game is far from guaranteed. So let's take a look at why Linux gaming is on very thin ice still, and why it could very easily fall into being something not exactly feasible. Okay, so let's start with the bad things happening to Linux gaming, because it is already sort of on a slippery downward slope. To begin with, we have the current mess that is Steamplay, Proton, but more generally the Valve Steam Deck compatibility rating. This thing is useful, no doubt. It tells you if your game will run on the Steam Deck or on a Linux PC before you buy. It's specifically made for the Steam Deck, but you can assume any verified or playable game will also run on any Linux computer. And some unplayable games on the deck will work on a regular Linux PC, but it's more of a gamble. The issue is, this rating changes, and not always positively. It's a measure of how well a game runs right now, which can evolve in two ways. The rating can get better, as in the game gets more playable, it sometimes happens, but also the rating can get worse up to the point where the game becomes unplayable, which is very unpleasant. And not just because, oh no, I can't play this game anymore, which wouldn't be too bad, but because it means that Valve's rating system is utterly untrustworthy as a purchasing aid. You can't rely on this rating to purchase a game for Linux or the Steam Deck specifically, because this rating is done by Valve themselves, not by the game developer. It doesn't imply official support from the devs. And if the developers change something for Windows users that breaks Linux gaming, we're out of luck. Well, mostly. Valve can, and sometimes does, fix problems straight in the Proton compatibility layer. But some changes Valve cannot fix at the Proton level, meaning that you might purchase a game because it's marked as verified, which is a strong hint that you can purchase this, it's gonna run on your device. And then days, weeks, months, or years later, the game could become completely unplayable out of the blue or lose access to certain features like a multiplayer mode. I don't have to explain why this is bad for Valve or for Linux in general. It makes our platform look completely unreliable. Which it is, really, because games running on Linux is currently just a happy accident, an unsupported way, in most cases, to get a game to run on a platform it was never designed for, and that the original devs don't want to support and don't support. It's not always the case. Sometimes game developers do support their game officially through the use of Proton. The problem is, most game developers never officially said that they're okay with this, and games that are officially supported by their developers through Proton and games that aren't are mixed with the exact same rating system, which is obviously not good. Of course, most of the games that become unplayable or have never been playable, that's due to anti-cheat software. The anti-cheat situation on Linux is still very problematic. I would argue it's actually getting worse. Major anti-cheat solutions are available for native Linux games, and they also support running the games with Proton, notably Easy Anti-Cheat from Epic or BattleEye. But just because you can make these solutions work on Linux through Proton doesn't mean that game developers actually do that. Easy Anti-Cheat from Epic is used by a lot of games that run perfectly on Linux. BattleEye works on Ark Survival Evolved or DayZ. This can work, and for pretty big games as well. So why are game developers not enabling these solutions for their games when they're run with Proton? For example, Fortnite, made by the same company as the one who makes Easy Anti-Cheat, namely Epic Games, Fortnite doesn't run on Linux, and the CEO of Epic said it will never happen until Linux has tens of millions of users, which I would argue it already has with the number of Steam Decks that have been sold and the number of Linux PCs in the wild that can play games. We do have tens of millions of potential customers, that's just a fact. Rockstar just moved GTA 5 Online to BattleEye, but they decided not to enable support for Linux through Proton. They even phrased it as if it was the Steam Deck not supporting their choice of anti-cheat, even though it does, and it's Rockstar that decided not to enable that support. Destiny 2 also uses BattleEye and has repeatedly said that they will never enable it for Linux and they will actually ban people trying to join from Linux. You also have all the stuff that uses the terribly invasive Vanguard anti-cheat that doesn't support Linux at all, like League of Legends or Valorant. You also have Roblox, who tried to make Linux support happen, but ultimately decided against it. That's a lot of big names that do run 100% fine on Linux. Mechanically, those games open, launch, and play. It's just that their game developers or publishers arbitrarily decided not to support Linux specifically. Except it's not that arbitrary at all. Because there are two main reasons here. First, you can't really run anti-cheat software with Proton at the kernel level, because Proton doesn't have these privileges. It runs in user space, like a program that your user runs. These kernel-level anti-cheats thus don't work on Linux, and can't make sure that the system itself hasn't been tampered with. This means that these tools are potentially less effective against cheating on Linux. Second, it also means that to let Linux gamers join the game, they have to let users that don't have the kernel-level anti-cheat software running play on their servers, meaning that some Windows users can now try and make that work as well by masquerading as Linux users, all the while they actively cheat on Windows. It just opens a door for cheaters that are determined enough, a door that you wouldn't have to open if you didn't accept Linux gamers. So yes, in most cases, a game developer only has to tick one small checkbox to enable their anti-cheat to work on Linux and to let Linux gamers join in on the fun. Except it has major consequences because cheaters are scum and they will use any single little opening to try and cheat on Windows, even if that opening was made for Linux users. Of course, plenty of big games have opened these doors to Linux users and they're not necessarily facing giant cheating issues, so I couldn't really say if those concerns are valid or not. Now these are just the Linux-related problems, because Linux games are Windows games, really, that use a third-party tool to run, namely Proton. The moment Microsoft implements something that can't legally be re-implemented with Proton, or can't technically be re-implemented through Proton, Linux gaming is dead. And it's not a metaphor, like it's really dead. If Microsoft updates to DirectX 27 and makes it either technically impossible to run that API on anything that doesn't have a specific dedicated security chip that only has drivers for Windows, then games made with DirectX 27 will never run on Linux. If Microsoft adds some kind of built-in upscale filter that all developers make use of and is patented in Windows, no chance we will reproduce this through Wine and Proton, and we might not be able to translate it either. If DirectX starts using features provided by Copilot on Windows or whatever other AI bullshit Microsoft adds to their OS, then it's game over for Linux. Basically, any Windows exclusive system feature or any hardware-backed feature that Microsoft adds and developers embrace can kill Linux gaming outright. Right now, this isn't happening, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. Have you heard about this rumor that Microsoft wants to kill kernel-level anti-cheat and people think Microsoft will save Linux gaming? Well, it's a false rumor and it's completely fabricated. Microsoft wants to implement another way to have such system access with less chances of killing the operating system, like with the CrowdStrike incident. This means that in the future, Microsoft will look at Windows-specific ways to run kernel-level tools. Ways that we likely will not be able to replicate on Linux because our way of running Windows games, Proton, doesn't run at the kernel level. So no, Microsoft is not going to save Linux gaming. Chances are if they implement one solution like this and all developers flock to it, they might actually kill Linux gaming instead. Another big thing is competition for the Steam Deck. The deck sold really well, but nowadays it's super underpowered and plenty of newer games just do not run on the Steam Deck. Technically, they don't have good frame rates, meaning that developers have no incentive to try and optimize their games for the deck. Because if there is no chance your game will ever run decently on that hardware with at least 30 FPS at the lowest settings, then why would you bother supporting the platform? And this means no anti-cheat support for Linux in general either, which hamstrings all non-Steam Deck gamers as well. Basically, Linux gaming is entirely dependent on Valve right now, and I can hear a bunch of you, Steam gaming is not the entirety of Linux gaming, I only buy my games on GOG or whatever. Congrats, there are thousands of you compared to millions of Linux users of Steam. Steam gaming is Linux gaming, for better or worse, the two are completely linked. Let's be honest, Valve makes Linux gaming possible even if you don't use Steam to run your games. You can play stuff with Heroic or Lutris or another launcher, but it runs with either a customized version of Proton or a heavily modified version of Wine that takes away a lot of stuff from Proton. DXVK and VKD3D weren't created by Valve, but a lot of their current work is funded and done by Valve. Without these things, you don't have Linux gaming. If Valve decides that the Steam Deck is not worth it, and SteamOS doesn't really have a shot, then Proton is dead, and Linux gaming dies with it. Let's be honest, Proton would survive, it's open source, people would keep contributing to it, but without the backing of such a giant company as Valve, there's no chance the compatibility stays as high as it is right now. Of course, it's not all bleak. We are currently on the precipice edge, but there are a lot of indications that we might actually fall on the right side of the cliff. First, Valve is really committed. You do not start your own hardware with the Steam Deck and its OLED model if you don't think there is a path to success. You do not. It is a huge investment for a company that earns money by basically doing nothing. They're just letting a store server run in the background and tweaking the visuals of the app every 10 years. Valve could have just sat down and let the money flow in by doing virtually nothing. They've had it easy for a long time and they could have cruised on that for longer and longer. The fact that they decided to commit that many resources and that much effort means that they don't see their future lying with Windows and they want to have more control over the distribution of their store and the games in it. So they are committed. We also have other things on the horizon. Valve says that they want to have SteamOS available to other computers, but we also have investment from big companies like Square Enix and Samsung in Playtron OS, another Linux-based distribution made specifically to be sold to handheld manufacturers and PC makers so that they have an OS that is not Windows. And it's an OS that isn't made by a game store company, which some developers would probably be wary to link themselves to too heavily. Let's be fair, if I already gave about 30% of all my revenue to Valve by just having the most sales of my games on Steam, I'm probably not rooting for them to take over 20, 30, 50% of the gaming OS market share. I'm probably financing another opportunity that isn't linked to a specific game store. We also have Microsoft adopting Vulkan's shader format instead of their own format in DirectX, meaning that they are moving towards more open standards, not closing things down. And that's interesting. It doesn't mean they'll move to Vulkan or anything, but interoperability is good. And it's probably not an attempt at embrace, extend, extinguish, because good luck Microsoft trying to extinguish the Kronos group. You know, the consortium backing and making Vulkan, who is composed by Apple, Intel, AMD, Nvidia, Samsung, Qualcomm, Google, and a bunch of others, including Valve. And we also have the current rise of Linux on the desktop. It is still small, like 4.5%, but the curve is going exponential, pretty much. And the more Linux users there are on PC, the more gamers there are as well. So in the end, is Linux gaming really failing right now? I'd say it's on a blade's edge. A gust of wind from Microsoft or from Valve in one direction or the other could just completely destroy all of our current efforts, or could make Linux gaming a huge market. They are, in my opinion, more bad news in terms of which games are working and our efforts, then there are good news, but there's also a lot of hope on the horizon, and if that hope can materialize in the form of SteamOS for everyone, Playtron OS, maybe more partnerships with kernel-level anti-cheat tools, then I think we're good. Linux gaming hasn't failed already. It could very much fail. It could very much succeed. It will all depend on how much Microsoft or Valve decide to duke it out and where they decide to push. Those are the two companies that will influence where Linux gaming is going. Where this video is going though is towards the segue to our sponsor. It's Tuxedo Computers. You know about them. They've been sponsoring the channel for like 2 or 3 years now, which means they're really committed to bringing you some really cool computers running Linux out of the box, and I'm really committed to promoting them because I only use their devices and I find them fantastic. Everything that I do currently on this channel, every podcast, everything is done on one of their laptops, and all the gaming that I'm doing is done on one of their desktop PCs. And they have a big range that should cover every price point and every need. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, and you want to give your money to a company that actually develops drivers and supports Linux, then click the link in the description and give Tuxedo Computers a shot. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Plenty of cool buttons to click underneath the video. And, well, I guess you can also support the channel. There are plenty of links in the description with a bunch of cool perks to do just that. Thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!